Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the EU-UK Forum's annual conference 2025. As you may know, the Forum was founded in 2020 when EU-UK relations were at a very low ebb, and there was a clear need for maintaining a dialogue at whatever level. That is why also the Forum is forward-looking, focusing on areas where the EU and the UK could and should work more closely together and exploring pathways to make that possible. But underpinning that is the key question: do the EU and the UK have, or at least are they now developing, a longer term strategy for a new relationship? There is clearly much more engagement than in the past. A pretty low bar, some might say. Many senior members of the British government, starting with the Prime Minister himself, are now in regular contact with their EU counterparts. As we've all seen, Keir Starmer was in Brussels yesterday as a guest of European leaders to take part in discussions on security and defence cooperation. And of course, sometime this spring, but maybe also a date has now been officially announced, there will be the first ever post-Brexit EU-UK summit, which hopefully will set a clear path for future cooperation on a variety of fronts. We may hear more about that in a moment. There may be widespread boredom with the historic Brexit debate, but there is most definitely a strong and a growing interest in wanting to know more about and help shape the new EU-UK relationship. People who have registered for today's conference come from all walks of life and many different countries. All the EU institutions and UK government departments, naturally, but also member state permanent representations and foreign ministries, local and regional authorities, third country missions, businesses and trade associations, think tanks and academia, NGOs and charities, and so on and so on. The conference was oversubscribed before we had even published a program. The number of in-person and online registrations is now more than 600. There's been a long waiting list for those who wanted to attend in person, and I apologize to those who did not make the cut. Hopefully you are watching this comfortably online. The conference is also being recorded and will be available shortly afterwards on our YouTube channel. Let me very briefly take you through the program. We will hear first via a recorded message from the European Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič, who, as you know, has retained EU-UK relations as part of his new trade portfolio in the second von der Leyen term. He is today in Warsaw attending a trade ministers gathering hosted by the Polish EU presidency. Maroš has spoken at all our annual conferences to date, and we very much appreciate his support for the forum from the very beginning. Then I am delighted to say Nick Thomas-Symonds, the UK Minister for the Constitution and European Union Relations, will give a keynote address. This will be one of the first public appearances by Nick in Brussels. I'm sure there'll be many more in the future. I have only some idea of how incredibly busy you are, Nick, so it is tremendous that you are with us this morning and made the time to be with us. Then, as now is tradition, Ipsos will present exclusive polling on public attitudes towards EU-UK cooperation. There's been a wealth of polling around the 5th anniversary of the UK's departure from the EU last Friday, and this is our contribution to that data pool. Ipsos' head of politics, Gideon Skinner, will present his findings and then be interviewed by Suzanne Lynch, Global Playbook author and associate editor at Playbook. After a coffee break, Julie Lynn Tegeland, EMEIA Area Managing Director at EY, will talk to us about Europe's competitive edge, a highly topical subject, of course, which will also set the scene for the following panel on growing Europe's economy. This panel will be moderated by Simon Nixon, formerly of The Times and The Wall Street Journal, and who is the author of the excellent newsletter Wealth of Nations, which I highly recommend. His panelists will be Nick Collier, Managing Director of the Brussels office of the City of London, Dirk Bleeker, Chief Commercial Officer at Sage, and Darren Ennis, Vodafone Group's Director of EU Affairs and Head of its Brussels office. After lunch, we will hear from Sandro Gozzi, MEP, the new European Parliament co-chair of the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, set up under the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, about his plans for the PPA. As you will know, Sandro is a former Minister for European Affairs in Italy and now sits as a member of the European Parliament for France. He will be followed by Stella Creasy, the Labour MP and chair of the Labour Movement for Europe. LME-supported MPs are now an important caucus within the Parliamentary Labour Party, and the LME is becoming a highly influential group in the current Parliament. They will then together have a fireside chat with Stanley Pignal, Brussels Bureau Chief of The Economist and author of the weekly Charlemagne column. Claire Samal, Director for European Offshore Development at National Grid, will then address us on bridging the North Sea via energy and climate cooperation. We will round off the day with a panel on EU security cooperation with Rosa Balfour, Head of Carnegie Europe, Julian King, the former European Commissioner for the Security Union and the UK's last European Commissioner, of course, and Alex Creswell, VP for Government Affairs and Public Policy at Graphcore, and himself a former British diplomat. The panel will be moderated by Henry Foy, Brussels Bureau Chief of the Financial Times. Finally, some thanks. I would like to thank all the speakers and moderators for accepting the invitation to take part so willingly and so promptly. I am most grateful to our sponsors, ACCA, City of London, EY, FIPRA, Graphcore, MSD, National Grid, Sage, and Vodafone. As you will see, this is not a typical Brussels EU conference, and securing sponsorship was not by any means a foregone conclusion. Their support has been terrific, and I applaud their vision. Finally, a thank you to the great team at Forum Europe, and especially Sophie Gwilt and Charlene Bowditch for their amazing logistical and promotional support.